The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Glory to you, O Lord. As Jesus passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciple asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither he nor his parents sinned. It is so that the works of God might be made visible through him. We have to do the works of the one who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. While I'm in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva and smeared the clay on his eyes and said to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. So he went and washed and came back able to see. His neighbors and those who had seen him earlier as a beggar said, "Isn't this the one who used to sit and beg?" Some said, "It is." But others said, "No, he just looks like him." He said, "I am." So they said to him, "How were your eyes opened?" He replied, "The man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and told me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' So I went there and washed and was able to see." And they said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I don't know." They brought the one who was once blind to the Pharisees. Now Jesus had made clay and opened his eyes on the Sabbath. So then the Pharisees also asked him how he was able to see. He said to them, "He put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and now I see." So some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a sinful man do such signs?" And there was a division among them. So they said to the blind man again, "What do you have to say about him, since he opened your eyes?" He said, "He is a prophet." Now the Jews did not believe that he had been blind and gained his sight until they summoned his parents, the parents of the one who had gained his sight. They asked them, "Is this your son who you say was born blind? How does he now see?" His parents answered and said, We know that this is our son and that he was born blind. We do not know how he sees now, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He is of age. He can speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone acknowledged him as the Christ, he would be expelled from the synagogue. For this reason, his parents said, "He is of age. Question him." So a second time they called the man who had been blind and said to him, "Give God the praise. We know that this man is a sinner." He replied, "If he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know is that I was blind and now I see." So they said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too?" They ridiculed him and said, "You are that man's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but we do not know where this one is from." The man answered and said to them, "This is what is so amazing, that you do not know where he is from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but if one is devout and does his will, he listens to him. It is unheard of that anyone who ever opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he would not be able to do anything." They answered and said to him, "You are born totally in sin, and are you trying to teach us?" Then they threw him out. When Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, he found him and said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered and said, "Who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" Jesus said to him, "You have seen him. The one speaking with you is he." He said, "I do believe, Lord," and he worshipped him. Then Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see might see, and those who do see might become blind." Some of the Pharisees who were with him heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not also blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But now you are saying, 'We see,' so your sin remains." The Gospel of the Lord. So there was a long gospel reading, but there's a lot of information in there. And we see that Jesus identifies himself as the light of the world. And what does light represent to us? Light represents illumination, understanding, sight, being able to see, not just physically, but spiritually, being able to see the truth, being able to know the truth. And so that's what Jesus is. He comes into the world to gives us knowledge of the truth, of who God is, who he is, and what life is all about. And so, and then also, light is a source of life. Without light, there is no life, right? And so truth, understanding, and life, that's what Jesus is about. But it's up to us how we respond. He comes to us as light to reveal to us the truth and to lead us to eternal life. But it's up to us to respond. How we respond will determine whether we receive light and life, or rather we grow in darkness and blindness. And so we see the different responses from today's gospel reading. The first response is from the blind man himself. We can call this response maybe boldness or belief. Right? He accepted Jesus. And it was Jesus who took the initiative. It was Jesus who took the initiative with him. Right? And so he said that this blindness was not caused by this man's sin or his parents' sin, but this is to reveal the works of God. So Jesus is using him to demonstrate and to reveal the truth of who he is and who God is. And so he is the one that initiates. He tells the man, he spits on the ground and makes mud and puts it on his eyes, and then tells the man to go and wash in the pool of Siloam. And here's the thing, the man obeys. He obeys God. He obeys Jesus. So he believed, and he obeyed. You know, there are other times in the Bible when people did not believe. They were incredulous. They did not do what the prophet told them to do or what Jesus told them to do. There was this hardness of heart. But here was a man who was humble and who was open to receiving sight, to receiving the truth, and to receiving guidance. And so he obeyed, and so he was able to see. But more than just physical sight, he gained spiritual insight. More and more he learns to know who Jesus is, and has the conviction to stand up for him, to bear witness to him. That's why I want to call this belief, but also boldness and witness too. That's his response, is to bear witness to Christ. We see this transformation. It's a gradual transformation. His first reference to Jesus, when they asked him, who was this that healed you? He referred to Jesus was a man named Jesus, or a person they called Jesus. And then later on with this conversation with the Pharisees, he becomes emboldened. He becomes more sure. He knows that Jesus is not just his name, but he's more than that. He said, he is a prophet. He is a prophet. And then by the end of the gospel reading, he said, Lord, I believe. And he bowed down and worshiped. Right? So knowing that Jesus is the Son of God, that he is divine, that he is the Messiah. So we see this gradual revelation, this insight with this man. More and more he comes to know and to see the truth of who Jesus is and what life is about. And then he's also empowered too. He's also empowered, right? He speaks up against the Pharisees. He's not afraid of the Pharisees. We see that people are afraid of them because they already said, anybody who says that Jesus is the Christ, they're going to be thrown out of the temple, the synagogue. And so no one wanted to mess with the Pharisees. But this man talked back. He was teaching the Pharisees. And he was saying, how can this man, if he is a sinner, how can he perform this miracle? Right? No one has ever heard of a man curing a man blind from birth. Never. Even the prophets, they would heal somebody because that person became blind and they restored the sight. But this man was born blind. So this was completely unheard of. And so he's reasoning with the Pharisees. He's saying, this man must be from God. He can't be a sinner. Right? And he's also telling them, you don't know. See, you don't know him. You're jumping to conclusion, but you don't know where he's from. And already you're judging him. But he did this at the cost to himself, because at the end he gets thrown out, right? At the end he gets thrown out, ostracized from the worship community, from the rest of society, really, right? But he doesn't care. He stands up for the truth. He stands up for his conviction. He lives out his belief. His faith is manifested in his actions and in his life, right? So as I'm going through these different responses, you can ask yourself as well, where am I? How am I responding? Am I like the blind man, or am I like some of these other characters that I'm going to talk about, right? Do I have faith? Am I being enlightened by Jesus? And do I live that out? Do I live out the truth in my life? Is it manifested in the way I live? Or am I afraid of the world? Am I afraid of what others may think of me or do to me? Or am I faithful to Jesus? Am I bearing witness to him? Or do I compromise? Right? And so we have to ask ourselves these questions. And so the second response is really the opposite response, is from the Pharisees, right? The Pharisees. And here we see a gradual hardening of the heart. In the beginning, they were open, they were talking, and they were divided among themselves as to who Jesus is. And so once they heard that Jesus performed this miracle, a group of them said, no, he must be a sinner because he performed on the Sabbath. Right? Already they're judging him, and because he worked on the Sabbath. Right? They're judging by appearance. And in the first reading, we hear that God doesn't judge by appearance, but from the interior from the man's heart. Right? And so the human beings tend to judge by appearance. So they judge that Jesus performed this miracle on the Sabbath, therefore he must be a sinner. But then some other of them, Pharisees, also said, wait a minute, if he's a sinner, then how could he perform this miracle? Maybe he is from God. So already in the beginning, there was a division among them. They were at least open to the truth. They were open to gaining insight into who Jesus is. But then they did not believe, right? It said that they did not believe in this miracle. And so they called his parents just to kind of almost to show that this is not true, right? But that didn't help. But in the end, towards the end of the conversation, they say, we know this man is a sinner, right? They've concluded. I don't know, this other group just quieted down. We don't hear from them anymore, right? Maybe they folded too because of this other group, because of how their forcefulness perhaps. But we don't hear from this other group anymore. Now they're united. Now their opposition is growing more and more. Beginning they were open, but now they know he's a sinner and that he's not from God, right? And so they reject him. They reject him, right? So they become blind. That's the irony here, is that they become blind. They are supposed to be scholars of the law, the most knowledgeable about Scripture and the things of God, but yet they fail to recognize Jesus, who is promised in the law and the prophets. Right? The irony there. They become blind. Because why? Because of their attitude of pride, of arrogance, of self-sufficiency. They think they know it all. And so when Jesus doesn't fit into their way of thinking, their expectation, then they judge him wrongly. And so they close their hearts to the truth. They become blind. And so that's the tragedy here. And so, likewise too, do we sometimes do that? Do we allow our arrogance, our pride, our knowledge to cloud our mind, to keep us away from the truth, right? To keep us from learning, from growing, from growing in our faith, from learning from God, because we think we're self-sufficient, we think we know it all, we have our minds made up. Or are we open to the truth and to grow and to change? And then the third type of response we see from the parents. We see from the parents, right? And this type of response I would call hesitation. Hesitation, right? So they know that Jesus performed the miracle. They know their son was born blind and now he sees, right? But when they were interrogated by the Pharisees, they were afraid because they didn't want to get thrown out of the synagogue. And so they say, we don't know. Ask our son. He's old enough. He can answer you. Don't ask us, right? And St. John made this emphasis because they were afraid for their own well-being, right? They believe, but instead of going further and living out that belief, they backed off because they were afraid of the things of the world. They were looking out for themselves. They were kind of selfish, right? They would rather put it off on their son, right? If anybody gets to be thrown out, maybe it's our son. We don't want to get thrown out, right? So they sacrificed their own son for their safety, for their preference, for their comfort, right? So if only they had the conviction like the son, yeah, this is our son, and yeah, he can now see, and Jesus healed him, right? No, they didn't want to make that statement, right? They just didn't want anything, and so they only went so far, right? And this is what happened with St. John at the early church. There were Christians who were straddling the fence, right? They believe in Jesus, but they didn't want to get kicked out of the synagogue. So they just kind of, right? They didn't want to bear witness to Christ. And so this gospel reading is meant for that early community too, right? St. John is saying, get off the fence, right? Bear witness to Christ, right? Take a side. Do you believe in Christ or not? Don't be lukewarm. Don't hesitate. Don't straddle the fence. Take a side and be faithful to Jesus. So likewise too, sometimes I see people like that, Catholics, who are kind of lukewarm, who are hesitant, right, to really live out their faith. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to stand out. They don't want to be the odd one out in the world. They kind of conform to the world, right, because of social pressure, peer pressure, and so on. They don't want to speak out the truth of their conviction. They know the teachings of the church, yet they're afraid to express it. They're embarrassed to do the sign of the cross when they go out for dinner or whatever, right? They're kind of ashamed of their faith. They want to just compartmentalize and just practice it 1 hour a week, but then the rest of the time, most people don't know that they're even Catholic, right? They just want to be part of the world and part of the church. And that's not the type of people that St. John wants. That's not what kind of people Jesus wants. And that's not what the type of people the church needs, right? We need people to bear witness to Christ, to be bold, to live out their faith, and not be afraid of the world. Because when we're afraid of the things and the people of the world, then we compromise our faith. We compromise our way of life, right? And so, as we reflect on the 3 ways that people respond in today's reading and how people respond to Jesus, and then how they grow, right? The parents, they're able to see, but they hesitate so they don't grow further, right? But this man, he was blind, but now he sees. He's the one that sees most clearly among all of them. And then the Pharisees, right? So privileged, now they are blind, right? Now they are in darkness. And so we live in the world, and the world is in darkness. We too are to be the light of the world. We are to share Christ's light to others, and not be ashamed or afraid to reveal that to others, not to be afraid to stand up for the truth. So Jesus is counting on us. At our baptism, we're given this light, and so let us live it out, right? Don't let this light go out, but to flame it, to set it on fire, to enkindle it even more, so that we may manifest too the light of Christ.